Right. People are still figuring out which breakout room they are going to between AI and engaging with the Sigma Pi. As of right now, I want to say that we are the favorite group currently with more people in our breakout. Ooh, yes, okay, Ben. Here we go. So whenever you feel comfortable starting, you can proceed, and I will welcome members as they come by.
Okay, you want me to go ahead and start?
Whenever you feel comfortable.
Okay, great. Okay, well, first of all, good afternoon, morning, evening. I'm sure everybody is. I'm on Eastern time, so it's afternoon for me. I've been up early working on my yard, landscaping. I bought a new house and had to tear out all of our landscaping, start over. It's a kind of a redo of about a 30-year-old house. And I live in Cincinnati, Ohio. My name is Mike Venerable. And I guess this is all, I'm here because about a year ago, I was asked to talk to a group of members of the fraternity at UC and University of Cincinnati, and that led to a whole bunch of questions afterwards. And but my background is I really have been in the software industry for about since 1994, so a long time, about 30 years. Really, probably more like 1990. And before that, I was in the military. I was a linguist and an intelligence analyst long ago. And that was the beginning of my exposure to, I guess, what I would call, you know, aggregation of information, data, things like that. I mean, I grew up, my mom was a key punch operator and things like that, but it was all very strange to me. But I ended up, after I got out of the military, accidentally ended up in the software industry, working at a company called Oracle for a while, and then left Oracle in the mid 90s and started my own company with a friend that we sold. That was in the Washington, D.C. area. And we sold that company in 1998 to a company in California. So I did that, did a few more years in the software industry. And then after a short break in the early aughts, became a seed investor in startup companies in software, initially software, and then also in the biotech and healthcare space. So in my life, I've probably led or made about 100 direct investments in concept stage companies, so brand new things. And because of the breadth of things that I've done, everything from consumer, but the split is about 50, is about probably 45 digital and healthcare, and about 10% consumer facing or other things. Because I always feel like the consumer thing is mystical. I don't really understand why. I remember the first time I saw Google long ago. I was using Alta Vista, which was a browser back that was created by a company that's now gone called Digital Equipment Company, and everybody used Alta Vista. And one day said, somebody, you got to try this Google thing. So I tried Google, and I don't know why it was better. I don't even know if it was noticeably better to me as a human, but for some reason, the name, the color of the screen, and the way they present results won. And I always remember that moment because I think the next time I had a moment like that was in November of 2022, when I first saw the ChatGPT release from OpenAI. And because I spend a lot of my time in the digital realm, we had been investing into what I would call more traditional machine learning type and computer vision, things like that, AI type companies. Investments in a computer vision driven physical therapy, musculoskeletal health company where you can essentially do all your assessments in physical therapy that doesn't require somebody to touch you, do it with your phone, kind of bring your own device model, collects all the biotelemetry. We have investments in computationally enhanced imaging for cardiac care, really taking magnetocardiac readings from your heart and understanding, do you have an MI? If you have an MI, are you not having an MI? Do you need to go to nuclear medicine? Those kind of things. We also have a few others. One is in the behavioral health space, and it's a natural language processing model to detect suicidality. So in your, really not so much your voice, but in the formation of your language. So we had been around and investing against AI for a while. We were also starting to see the impact it was having on discovery on the drug development side. So we invest in a fair number of pharmaceuticals that are, again, these are preclinical coming out of research institutions. And I started to talk to my PhD. I had some PhDs who worked for me on the drug development side, and I said, this is all going to become computational eventually. Like all this biology and chemistry will be simulated. And they used to think I was crazy, and they don't think I'm crazy anymore. They think it's something that's possible. But I don't think anybody who was following this, except the handful of people who worked inside of Google on their platform and at OpenAI, had any idea the impact that the GPT technology would have on the advancement of what we would call generative AI, which is the exploitation of large language models to do some pretty remarkable things. And I don't know if has anybody seen the 4.0 release that they just did the video about it, which was pretty amazing, where they actually have phones talking to phones now, and bots talking to bots.
Have not seen it yet.
That is well worth it. You just go to the OpenAI homepage and they have a big launch screen. And as an investor, I just stepped down as the leader of this organization I was in, so I'm not really doing direct investment at that stage anymore, but I'm still active as an investor and involved in a lot of companies. I have to say that this was, and I think, and is, so I grew up in the age of the integrated circuit. The chip really defined the trajectory of my life. It's defined the trajectory of the lives of many of us, from the aggregation of digital data. In my time in the 90s, what really drove it was fear of Y2K, which was what was Y2K going to mess up everybody's computer systems, which drove the adoption of relational databases and applications like big companies like SAP and Oracle and others. And that created this large data set that people wanted to exploit. And they thought, well, we'll just put it in relational databases. It'll be easy to exploit. And of course, it wasn't. It was all proprietary structures. So we actually built our business taking that data out and working with analytic companies in the marketing space to do things like targeted credit card marketing, loan marketing. It was the beginning of the long distance era and the mobile era. So we did a lot of work in telecom. That's how we built our business. And while that was analytic, it didn't really cross over into the AI space the way it is today, but it definitely changed everything. And then the internet, of course, came along at the end of the 90s. That was a big thing, obviously, changed everything, connected everybody together. And then the last piece, I think, was really broadband and mobile together. When we think about smartphones as a thing, but smartphones represent a massive investment in infrastructure, not just carrier infrastructure like fiber optics, but also just the signaling and switching devices that live on towers and now in the sky. So these things really defined, a lot of how my world evolved. And I remember when I was talking to the class or the students, I was really talking to students, mostly graduating students at University of Cincinnati. I said, this technology is going to define it. We were about 8 months into this post-generative AI or GAI age, is going to define your life. It will be the defining technology of your life, just like integrated circuits were for mine. And every time now that I'm sort of spending a lot of my time, because I'm sort of quasi-unemployed, just totally focused on how this impacts the universe, how it affects my kids. I have 3 college-age kids or recently graduated. I have an older daughter as well. How it affects things like healthcare, how it affects education, how it affects government, how it affects international relations, all these things. It is a fundamental change. It's not a modest change or a step change. The ability to drive these generative AI, these GAI models this way was completely unexpected in the time frame that it happened. And so that leads me to think a lot about how it will affect people and how do you start. So I think the easiest way that I think about it, and I'm interested this can be a conversation because you all are the adults have jobs, are working and are thinking about this, I assume. I mean, we're really, obviously, we all know we're surrounded by AI more than we think, but this is a bit of a different world we're entering into. The first thing I think about is just my own productivity and work. And I have said to many people that I've talked to about this, companies and CEOs that we're invested in, students. I've just finished teaching my first class at a local state university here on commercialization, and I really encouraged the students, really made them use these technologies in class, that you really have to embrace this. You cannot, one, it's a remarkable thing. So in this class, I would drive from where I either worked or lived. It takes me an hour to get to the school. It was a night class on Wednesday night. And I would literally write my class notes with my phone with OpenAI, ChatGPT open, write the class notes and write the questions or review questions I was going to use. And it was a 3-hour class, so it was a lot of work. And I would iterate through that while I was driving and come up with what was going to happen. Now, that maybe, I don't know how I felt safe. These are roads I've driven on my whole life, so I didn't feel like I was in danger of anybody. But I just couldn't have done that, 18 months ago. That was not going to happen. It wouldn't. It's different than like just doing a voice memo and transcribing it. It's a totally different experience. So I really encourage people to say, there are many ways and many places this manifests today, but I would say that it's bringing it into your own work, whether you're creative, whether you're analytical, whatever you might be doing, try it. So I'll give you another anecdote. Is I work with a physician who's an epidemiologist, who's very well known on this big initiative that he's driving, and there's a lot of statistical processing done in epidemiology and quality improvement in healthcare, and there are about 95 people in an organization that he's kind of quasi runs that are about half those people are doing SPS programming, statistical programming every day. And he called me or texted me one day and said, I got to get on a Zoom with you. I got to show you something. I said, okay, what is it? He said, I've been messing. He's 69. Okay. He's a very well member of the American Board of Pediatrics, very well-known person. I've been playing with this ChatGPT, he said. I don't know what these, we could be so much more productive. And I don't even know how many of these people will need to do this statistical programming if we start using this and figure out how to build it into workflows. Okay, from that conversation about 8 months ago, we're continuing to sort of dig into that. And I can tell you that it's quite shocking the degree of work that you can transition with this as a core component of the work. And in this case, it's just essentially dropping in a spreadsheet of output and having ChatGPT do the, and I'm focused on ChatGPT, but you can do similar things in Google's platform. Microsoft has a product called Copilot that many of you may be familiar with. It's quite amazing what it does. I had another person who runs a family office, manages wealth, does very complex tax returns, employs one person full-time just to do those tax returns. And he said, I don't think I need this person anymore. So if you don't think it's going to, this is not a comfortable thing. I deal with, state level officials here who are very attenuated to this because in Ohio, believe it or not, we have a massive shortage of workers. We have full employment. We have a lot of really interesting things going on. We have a growing tech economy driven by Intel build out of fabs here, big data center push as well, because we have a lot of water. We have a lot of flat land, and we have workforce and power and infrastructure, although we're running out of power pretty fast. But this is an uncomfortable thing for CEO. A CEO cannot walk out, the door and stand and make a speech or in his quarterly statement say, you know what, we can double our revenue and not add any people in the next decade. That's not what they're going to say publicly, or we can lose people, we could eliminate people. But this is a very profound change to, I would say, not just clerical white collar work or light administrative, that there are all kinds of specialized fields where this is going to change how people do their jobs. Most improvements in productivity. Now we've been, as an economy, we've been struggling. We kind of burned through all the sort of the IT gains of computational gains of the last 20 years, and productivity has been sort of slacking. So, the economist who worries not for their job says, oh, productivity gains always get absorbed by the economy. And you just redeploy the work. The money gets redeployed and the work gets redeployed. But that is exciting, I guess, as long as it's not your job that's getting redeployed or your work that's getting redeployed. And that's why I say there's nothing you can do first as a human being, as a person acting in an economy, is to think about how this affects your day-to-day work and kind of embrace it. Not look away and I think it's not, it's not a problem, but just sort of understand it. And by the way, in your, like, just your personal stuff can get really, really enhanced by this technology. It can help you plan a trip, can help you. I have a young lady that I've been working with on a project who's going through this medical thing, and she had to go get these tests. And she used this technology to gather tons of information about these tests that she was being given, so she would be a more informed patient. With her, I like that there's a dog guest. My dogs are out front with my wife. I said, get the dogs out of the house so they don't bark. They always manage to bark in the middle of something like this when I'm doing something like this. But the idea was, how can you be a better patient? Your kids, if you have kids in school, how are they using this in school? Because, one thing is true, we never, as an organism, so far as a species, have resisted the urge to adopt technology, whether it's good for us or not. So I think that's, that notion of how do you personally use it? How can you adapt to it or adopt it into your activities, not just your work, but also your personal life, will get you more familiar with it and anticipatory thinking about how to do it. I think managers have to say the same thing. Like you have to think about in your work stream. So before I left, I left in January, stepped down and retired from that job. But before I left, we started to instantiate these technologies into our work as aggressively as we could. One, because we're investing in new technology companies, so we should be, as I always say, eat your own dog food. So these are the things we need to know. Two, it really affected how we thought about certain markets and kinds of investments we might make. Is anybody here in software or IT? Okay, so my having been in that world, or if you manage or lead or have to pay for that kind of work, I would tell you that our initial goal, we had a portfolio of about 25 companies. 20 of those companies had some sort of software development involved in them. And the immediate push we said is you should have a 2x increase in productivity using Copilot and other techniques within a year out of your IT group. 2x productivity. That should be your goal. And in 3 years, and then 2 years, you should be thinking 4 to 5x. Now, I can tell you that really sophisticated, talented, smart software people told me I was an idiot when I said that. And they don't think I'm an idiot anymore. 2x is a pretty good standard to set. And you have to think about it. It's not just the coding piece, it's the whole value chain of documentation and support and managing the operations of like assets you need on the technical side to do that. And I think that's just continue to happen. Now, the good news is there's a huge backlog of, like, most of you, if you deal with software every day, it's not, I would say it's a low accountability profession if you're a software developer. And I say that as a software person. So it's not always the best, like everybody deals with software and thinks it could always be better, or you're waiting for them to change something in the software that they don't have. So that'll be a good thing in the end. We have a big backlog and hopefully it'll improve things, but that's a big change. It's a big change for people who have built their careers in software like I did. And other people are now. It's like you have to think about, what is my role when I can do a lot of the coding in a different way. So I become more of an orchestrator, product manager, engage with that. That is a huge thing. So that's kind of, getting people comfortable with the idea of embracing it in your own world. Think about how you can use it, how your teams can use it. And also, I think it's just a new way to think about infrastructure. So I'll pause there because it's 20 minutes in, and I want to get to a couple other topics. I want to talk a little bit about the recalcitrant, resistant parts of our world that I think this can have a big impact on. Are there any questions or thoughts? I mean, you're all professional people. You're out dealing with this stuff every day. What lessons do you have, or how do you think about it? Go ahead.
Hey, Michael.
Velvet.
Thanks for all the information. I'm in the training and development field. And so I have been definitely embracing it, and I attended a seminar that said it's not our enemy. It's not. In fact, it can help, bridge the gap between the learner and the subject matter expert. So, I'm good about it. But the one question, and maybe you're going to get into this, the one question I have is with, we produce all this great information and we just piles up, piles up, piles up. But is there research being done on how to better absorb all that information? We still have, I don't want to say a limited capacity in our human brains to wrap our head around, information. So is there research being done? Because I could see coworkers going, hey, I just developed this, 30-page document this week. And then they come out with another one the next week. And it's like, wait a minute. I still have to read and comprehend and stuff like that. So it's really cool. These tools are great. But is there any research being done to address we still have to take it in, all this great information?
I think production of stuff is going to be the next issue we have. Like if everybody can make a movie with a text prompt, I guarantee you they won't all be very good, so, and also who's going to watch them? So I'm assuming we're going to be in a world where bots are making movies for other bots to watch that we're not even involved in. I mean, that will just happen. That's a good question. I don't know about, I mean, there is definitely going to be a production problem. And I think that's why, as a person and as a professional, I think about it as how do I become more efficient so that my output is better quality and not, and also is impactful, because you definitely could write, 20 books in a year that were pretty bad. Because in the end, you're really, it can respond to what you did. And we're in the sort of, we're kind of in the prompt engineering which I didn't really want to go into, but using and how to manipulate this, I think is fascinating. I think training and development, by the way, is one of those projects I'm working on has a big training and development piece to it, and we're really focused on how to completely re-engineer the way that is delivered in a different way, using this technology. Hopefully, working with one of the big platform companies. But yeah, we're definitely, we're sort of overloaded already, and we're not terribly selective. So we're certainly not understimulated as a species. So I think it's a problem now. Yeah, you should tell people just calm down. You don't have to make more, make better. Great question. Anybody else?
Michael, I have a question. Yeah, I have a question, and this is maybe more of a philosophical type thing. I was actually talking to one of my interns yesterday about AI, and I am open to using it. I love the idea of taking a bunch of research and sifting it and using it to kind of make things more manageable. Because we're always looking at trends and, unmet needs and kind of stuff out in the community. But one of the things I asked was where does critical thinking, which, coming from kind of an academic, critical thinking to me is really important. I feel like we're not critically thinking enough. And so where does critical thinking come in AI? And is there anything that humans can do with either a moral, social, critical thinking perspective that AI cannot or will not do in the future?
So
I told you it was going to be a doozy.
These are all, I think it's one, I'm very encouraged to know that you're all thinking about this and you're all doing it, because I think people out, like it's up to adults in the workforce in the world today, different positions with the government, industry, whatever, figuring this out is going to be the challenge, or kind of I'm not done working, but I'll be there. I'm not working like most of you probably are engaged every day. I think this is one, there's a lot of controversy and pushback and back and forth and dialogue around. I think the most vocal and visible people on the topic you just described, which is really Sam Altman at OpenAI. Musk is extremely vocal on this topic, and they don't necessarily, they started together at OpenAI. I don't know, a lot of people can go back and read the history of OpenAI, how it started, who started it. And now they're sort of at odds, because I think, and everybody, there's a lot of examples of people going into Google's or OpenAI and asking a question and get an answer that's specific and controversial, right? And I think the different, we if you think about it, a language model as a generic thing, which is how we think of these things today, most people are thinking of them in their actual implementations that I'm involved in or looking at. There's much more training and specificity around how the models are being used, and so we're seeing sort of the generic open, like the sort of like everything's in there, and everything in there creates a bunch of craziness, and they're obviously how it's trained and the choices it's making as it decides is a reflection of humans, but also humans that are tuning it. And the great controversies are how are these things being trained and who's training them and what is their mindset. Because critical thinking, the core critical thinking is such a big meta question. This critical thinking means that anybody can critique other people's thinking. Well, that means there's not an answer. That means, an expert, I always like it when the media says experts say, like, well, who called them experts? And if anything we know today is that the pace of knowledge discovery, like I've learned a ton about biology, chemistry, and drug development as a layperson over the last 15, 20 years. And I just say, it's just amazing to me how much we know and how little we know. Like we can spend $1 billion to develop a drug, and at the end, there's a piece of biology we didn't understand that we mess up. So critical thinking has to be a core part of how this evolves. And I don't know what the answer is. These are deep questions. How much can we comprehend? How are we going to all get along? I don't know. Great question. I would be interested in you hear anything about that. Anyone else? Have anything right now? You can also throw something in the chat if you want to. So going back to like what good I think it can do. What are the good things that I see? We create a high degree of highly specialized knowledge that is locked away in places like, with forgiveness to my friends in the consulting industry, consulting firms. Like I do a fair amount of work with EY. My son works at EY, McKinsey, people like that. There's a lot of specialized knowledge, frameworks, things like that, that we pay for today to be communicated to us by a human. And God bless them, but they charge too much. It's too expensive. And it's also really not an open process. In other words, there are all kinds of standards that are used in business and education, other things that are in these bizarre frameworks and rubrics that have to be produced into documents and all these things. And there's a lot of money spent, kind of transactional friction, forming those things, getting them, what does that look like? What's a good way to do an ISO audit? What's a great way to do some sort of audit of a school system or corporate audits, things like that. These things are all very wrapped around expensive consulting businesses. And I think those will start to come down and become more accessible and usable, and that'll take cost out of the system. And maybe we can redirect those dollars into, lower student teacher ratios or better materials or more training. I don't know where it goes, but that seems to me that's a huge inefficiency. In other areas, just again, if we go back to healthcare, we have a massive, this is just the US. We have a massive provider shortage in the US. Europe has a massive provider shortage. We're at peak. One thing about young people today, I always tell them, you'll live in an age where the human population peaks and begins to decline. I don't even know when that has happened before in history. I'm trying to figure that out. Like, I wonder if it might have happened during the plague. Was that a big enough event? But other than an astronomical event like the Younger Dryas, things like that, there's not been a time in known written history when the population of the world has declined. That's happening. So we're going to run out of people to actually do work at some point. The super aged countries are not just, South Korea, they're Singapore and Malaysia and Vietnam, and China has a massive problem. And we have this problem. All of Europe has this problem, that we're running out of people. And the interesting thing is today, because of theories about why this is true, but countries usually had, as they're developing, their population and replacement rates would be high for a long time. So everybody would think that, South Asia, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, most of Africa would continue to grow fast and have replacement rates that are historically consistent, but that's actually not happening. There's a very fast decline in replacement rates. There's a couple of Canadian demographers whose theory is smartphones. So the primary way to slow down high replacement rate growth of humans' birth rates is essentially to have women say, I'm not going to have as many kids. That puts a stop to it right away. So now women that are usually coming from developing countries, may live in poverty, they have social norms and cultural norms that would have them have lots of kids, have access to a world, media, and influencers who would say, no, you don't need to have 7 kids and live in poverty. You don't have to do that. You can stop that. So you're seeing birth rates peak and plateau in places like Nigeria and India, much faster, Angola, much faster than history would have normally predicted. So we're going to have a big problem. We're going to need productivity. So one thing we're going to need is healthcare practitioners. The dissemination of highly specialized medical knowledge is difficult to do for humans. I do a lot of work with Cincinnati Children's Hospital here in Cincinnati. It's the #1 rated pediatric hospital in the world. A lot of people don't know that. It's been a top 3, but now they're #1. The quality of care, there are people there who can do things that maybe only 10 people in the world can do, specialized kinds of surgery, understand and diagnose super rare diseases, all these things. How do we really deliver that knowledge out to the world? I think I mentioned to you that we have a company that we invested in that uses semantic structure, how you speak, to identify whether you are at risk for episodic suicide. We and many other countries in the world have a suicide epidemic right now. Okay, we don't have, if you will go call today and try to get an appointment with a psychiatrist, good luck. You'll be 90 days to 120 days out. The only way to get that kind of treatment is go to an ED, an emergency department, and declare that you're a risk to yourself. Then I think I'm going to kill myself. I'm ideating. So being able to take the capabilities of world-class psychiatric treatment and embody that in a model that produces and interacts with the patient is a huge boost. That means we can export that knowledge to anybody in the world, any kid, anywhere in the world that has trauma, any adult that has trauma and is deeply damaged or in a bad spot. We can do that. That's the beginning, I think, of really exporting and sharing and leveling care across not just the country, but the world. So I think that's a case where I think you'll see a lot of good come from. Any other examples that come to mind? I think education's a good one.
I can't really think of any industry where AI would have such a massive increase in productivity. Me being in real estate, as I am right now, my main use of AI as a large language model is anything that deals with property description, anything that deals with me typing out anything that helps client understand this is what this house is, this is what we can do. In the state of New York, I as a real estate agent am not allowed to fill out real estate contracts for buyers and sellers. That is only lawyers, mainly because the state of New York has a pile of more laws that they would rather someone more law qualified to take care of those contracts. But I will use AI to read over the contract and look for specific keywords and say, hey, look for insert those terms that might be discrimination, for example. And I will proofread it using AI. That's the thing that I'm noticing. But my question for you is, given how the impact of AI and productivity is not equal across all industries, salespeople can only do so much with AI because sales is a person-to-person interaction. Do you think there's any industry where the application of AI should be highly restricted? Anything that deals with, like, I'm thinking of Cambridge Analytica, who had that scandal by using people's information to tailor ads for themselves. And there was a company in London, a consultant firm, who was involved in information. How did they describe it? Hold on. They described it as private intelligence companies, and they would use data from Facebook and other social media to tailor ads in a way that it would induce certain proclivities to people. So do you think that AI being able to do that should be something that is restricted across industries?
Well, I think that's a good question. Obviously, that's a lot of the the most nefarious algorithm of all is TikTok's algorithm is known as the most the worst. But Facebook, Instagram, all of these. What is so? Anytime you ask for restriction, who are you asking to restrict it? And this is one of my bigger. If I wanted to go utopian to dystopian, here's my dystopian fear. I don't know if you ever watched a congressional hearing or a Senate hearing around a technical topic, but I was watching Rob Califf, who is a good friend of a friend of mine who leads the FDA. And I can tell you that the FDA today is intellectually overwhelmed by the amount of knowledge created and discovery happening in the drug industry. It's just moving way too fast. So we have to have some way to constrain, development. We have to run clinical trials. We have to do all these things. But the government is overwhelmed. This is a very accomplished, intelligent human being, Rob Califf. He's very gifted in this space, who runs the FDA. But the questions that are asked of him are so predictable, depending on who's asking, that they're not even relevant to the problem. The problem is how do we actually address and move forward all these great advancements? How will we pay for them? So that because everybody wants to, everybody says, people always say healthcare should be cheaper. I said it's not going to get cheaper. You're going to want more of it if it increases your useful life, your livability. Right? Nobody's going to do if your kid can be cured. I say it's maritime law. If your kid could be cured by a gene therapy available only on a ship 20 miles off the coast of the United States, you'll row the boat out there to get your kid cured if it's not approved in the US. This is the world we're going to have in 20 years. That's how fast it's going to happen. So I worry that the government doesn't, like I read the regulation that came out from the administration about how to regulate AI. It's laughable. The government is not competent to really regulate things. And how does the government use AI today? I would say this, the authoritarian instinct of all governments, and I don't care what government system you're in, I say, that all governments, are organized for the benefit of the people in power. That's how it works. And that doesn't matter if it's a democracy. Communism, Marxist economies had their own reward system. You could be rich in Russia if you had a DACA and you could make good helicopters or whatever. All these places end up the same. The authoritarian impulse of governments are extremely well served by this technology. We see it all over the world today. And that's the scary part. So, and that's how you end up with people who I think now we worry about, these authoritarians where there's literally no path for them to be out of power except death. That's kind of where we're headed. Or, some sort of internal, dispute they have with another authoritarian, whoever their posse is, gets mad at them and wants somebody else to come along. Yeah. That's the scary part to me. So when we think about restriction, I don't know who's going to restrict it. I worry about that. Go ahead.
And so I was saying a coup, right? A coup at the top, but the restricting of AI gets in, like you said, gets into kind of that scary space of who's making these decisions, what biases do they have, what are they bringing, how are they viewing it? And then, you mentioned who's training the AI to bring us results, and their biases get involved as well. So
it's very true.
Yeah,
that's why I said we've launched the boats. We don't know where we're going.
Right.
Going back to the use of personal information, I think that has existed since there have been credit bureaus. I always call it the tyranny of being the anomaly in an algorithmic world, is that I'm the anomaly. I'm the person who had really bad credit and didn't pay my bills for a long time, but hey, I'm better now. I've reformed. All that's behind me. I'm ready to get my mortgage. That algorithm doesn't predict that I might be different than everybody else whose background looks at me. They don't know me, right? They don't know anything about me. Now, mathematicians would say eventually the algorithm can get smart. If there's enough data, you can tell. We don't seem to care about the use of our data. I mean, if we were really upset about it, we wouldn't get spam calls on our cell phone. figure out a way to, to find out who's doing that. That do not all these things that happen to us from a marketing standpoint, we just give it away. So maybe the next layer of AI, there are actually some new apps coming out that do this, that sort of become your persona to things like that, like they intercept. But it's, I don't know that, I don't have a good view of where that goes. How this all gets quote unquote regulated, because I just don't think the governments are competent to regulate it.
I have a
Or they'd be
question
doing
for you.
Sure.
Do you think that AI can be trained to help with the, you're talking about just the accumulation of knowledge within various systems. Do you think that AI can actually be trained to help manage that collection of information in a more efficient manner?
I think that's the best use of proprietary language, using an LLM structure, a large language model structure, on a big corpus of information. So that's a couple of friends who are working on problems like that today. And one is in kind of medical writing, within like a big pharma company or something like that. The other one is also in a clinical sort of world. Like, what do we know about these kinds of patients based on clinical notes and research and published studies and all that, and how does that inform how we treat them? Because if you were ever going to try to do that on your own, I don't care how smart you are as a researcher, you just don't know. You'll never index it all. And I think I always used to say to people before this is an AI thing, I would say the guy who worked with me, for my partners, he had one of these medical VIP sort of concierge things, and something would be going on. I said, the internet is smarter than your VIP doctor. I'm just telling you, the internet knows more about this topic than your doctor does, because that's all of the doctors. So now you have these, these models that can essentially be all the doctors, all the researchers all together and sift through it. Now, is it perfect? No, but the knowledge of, it's hard. It can be helpful. I think, again, I gave the example, and I think this is I'm big on patient empowerment. I think this whole, the asymmetry between the system and you as a patient or a family member is not good. And I think slowly but surely the medical profession is figuring this out. But most of the time today, you're not even dealing with a doctor. You're dealing with a PA or a nurse practitioner or something like that. I think being able to understand more about your own care, be more knowledgeable, can also sort of take some of the ridiculousness out of the system. For example, if you want an antibiotic today, it's very hard to get one unless you go down the street to the urgent care center that everybody knows exists for one reason. That's to write Z-Pak scripts and charge you $75 for an office visit. So you can get a Z-Pak because you have a throat infection that your doctor says might be a viral infection. I don't want to give you an antibiotic. Okay, that's an inefficiency that's not doing anything to solve the problem of too many antibiotics being prescribed because I go around it. I can tell you today, Ozempic and Mounjaro are being ordered by people who can order those drugs simply because they have some sort of medical practice that has a prescribing component to it, and they're reselling those drugs to people who want them for weight loss, not for T2D. So they're taking those drugs out of the type 2 diabetes market and reselling them with double markups to people who want to lose weight. Now, those drugs are miracle drugs for people who want to lose weight. That's great. But those drugs should be, the system is broken because it lets things like that happen. This is all that our mess in healthcare and our mess in education is my greatest hope. The fact that we have such a resistant system in terms of just outcomes based in both cases. We don't really drive outcomes in education, and we don't really drive it in healthcare because we don't economically pay for that. We economically pay for other things. So that's where I think it has the most disruptive potential is in education. Like I paid for 4 kids to go to college. I can tell you that could have been a much more efficient. I always say, I hope you don't ever pay for your kids to go to college the way I had to pay. That could be a much more efficient process. It could be done in 18 to 24 months easily. And I just taught a college class, and I'm very close to some, educational leaders in the state, and I'm pushing them on this whole idea of how do we change this? Because candidly, when you take your kid to get shoes, right, they don't ask you how old your kid is. They measure their foot. Okay. So why are we why are we constraining kids in this way of like put them in cohorts? We lock them into a cohort. The cohort is not specialized to them, and it doesn't really match their interest or needs. And then we send people to college. Like I can tell you, here's something. Anybody here a data scientist? A lot of people were told over the last 5 years to go into data science. A lot of kids got trained in data science, and they all washed up on the shore last year and didn't get jobs. They didn't get jobs because companies, one, are pausing, and two, they're saying, wait a minute, how many of these people I need? What's this AI thing going to do for me? So becoming path dependent on a certain career, and then how do I get retrained? How do I add that to it? It's very that's where my hope is. So really, education and healthcare, I think, could be radically disrupted by this stuff in a good way, and entertainment as well.
So
Go ahead.
I attended a workshop on using generative AI, and the facilitator mentioned that the introduction of AI may be on the same level as the Industrial Revolution, with as many things as it is going to affect. Would you agree with that statement?
More.
Wow.
Greater, like agriculture. Like I think it's the most disruptive thing since agriculture. There is nothing quite like it. So we're not even talking about so Vinod Khosla, who's a really successful and eccentric venture capitalist, has funded a lot of things. Has his view of like, eventually, people will have their own personal robots in 10 years. Like we'll have thousands of them. We won't know how to live without one. And so as a thought exercise, we were talking about this, a couple of my friends and I, and our wives were having breakfast, and we're talking about it. One of my friends brought the quote up, and then we just spent the rest of the morning noting times that we could use a personal robot. Like here's the time somebody had forgotten a sweater, somebody needed something from the kitchen. It's like, hey, where's the robot at?
I want the robot to do my dishes.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say, there's somebody here who works for MSG. I think I would say so. The sphere, which I think is a remarkable. I'm dying to go there. I think, but I think entertainment is going to be massively changed. And I'll give you a good example. My son and I were talking about this when OpenAI released its version of video, kind of prompt-driven video generation. And I read an article by somebody who said, a filmmaker who said, making a film with this kind of technology is just as hard as making a film. Like, well, I understand that's not the point. People say you can get a bad answer out of OpenAI. You could crash the right flyer too. That doesn't mean there aren't going to be 787s and SpaceX and all that kind of stuff. It's moving faster than that. But I think the fascinating thing is my son and I are talking about, just think about the ability to change. You'd have alternate endings on a DVD. People are like, oh, we got an alternate ending. Imagine being able to just watch a great movie the next time through and just change a key plot point and just say, I want it to go this way instead of that way. What would happen? What would happen? It would be pretty wild. You could just have we'll be there in 20 years. You'll take archived movies, change how they end. What if Sonny lives in The Godfather if you watch The Godfather? What if your favorite character who dies doesn't die? I think that's a pretty amazing thing. I think I had a meeting with some people that own a sports team 2 years ago. We were talking about this when it kind of first happened, actually a little more recent than that. And I said, you have all these archived players and statistics and data set. You could just pile all that in and create simulations of teams from the past playing now. You could let people manage the team, and it could all be rendered into an actual what feels like a live game. And you could stand on the field. They looked at me, and of course MLB, NBA, and NFL. All these people are thinking about this now. Like, how do we really monetize that? The question becomes, I think, there's a podcast called Future Fossils. It's kind of an older podcast. Guy named Michael Garfield does it. He has a lot of interesting guests on it. There's a really good episode of it that's about two people talking about your wattage or your load. So the problem is, like, if you think about us as a thing, we're remarkable. I mean, think about how much food you eat every day compared to how big you are. It's like, how's this working? It seems like I should need more. Like our dogs, we feed our dogs a certain amount of Like, it seems like what a great machine. It's less than a tank of gas. It's very efficient. It's a biological entity. But the wattage that we carry around with us now is pretty massive, right? Just like we're all sharing this broadband thing. We all have computers on. There's all kinds of crap happening. We don't even know what's going on that makes all this magic go on. I just drove around my car today, and it's a hybrid, so I use some gas and some battery, some lithium, I guess, whatever's in there. Like, we're carrying a ton of wattage around. This is going to increase that dramatically. The biggest challenge that we have right now is power. There's a great article in the journal last week. Ohio's probably the like 7th or 8th, state in terms of potential per capita data center capacity. And I know a lot of data center plans that are moving forward here. That was before this even started. Like, we're going to have to build lots and lots of compute, lots of energy is going to be consumed to entertain us and to do all this stuff. And I don't see you're not going to do it with green energy anytime soon. So we're going to need natural gas is going to come back on. I know that coal plants are starting to come back online to support data centers. It's just crazy. So I think when I say industrial, and I think the other reason it's different than the Industrial Revolution is I think the pace is faster. Like, this is all happening digitally, so everything goes like that. Right? It just doesn't take that much time for everybody to. We all have access to it now. It's all there. Not everybody had access to the fundamental elements. The electrification took a long time. The infrastructure to move oil and gas around to do all those things took a long time. You don't need to have anything but electrons to make all this happen. And that's the difference. That's the digital age change, is that just shaking the electrons changes everything. In the past, we always had to carry stuff around and move it around and do something. We cook it up, melt it down, and cut it up. There was a lot of friction. We would have never all met, in that age. We couldn't have a conversation about the Bessemer process, new loom technology. None of that would have happened. So I think it's cool. I mean, I'm kind of, it's fun to watch it happen and to have hope. But I also think it's sometimes it's also, seems like our technology has outpaced our ability to govern ourselves and use it well.
Yeah.
At a global scale, no matter where you go, it's kind of a mess. Yep.
Kind of on that line of thought, I actually work for a boutique consulting firm in product management, and we're actually looking to get into AI. The consultants to help in one of the practices we're looking at is helping them shape their future path.
Is this software product management?
Yes.
Yeah, so my wife's product manager, my daughter's product manager.
Yeah, I specialize in healthcare myself, but I do product management within IT systems.
I think soon, you're 5 years from product managers basically running the show.
I have found that a lot of the techniques I learned from product management mentorship would be well applied for a lot of other careers.
Yeah, it's probably true. Any other thoughts?
As we keep on talking, I would like to point out that it's almost 1:55, and the next session starts at around 2. So, Michael, given how interesting the topic is, perhaps sharing some means where we can contact you so that we can each either ask you questions or we can continue our conversation later on would be helpful, because if we keep on talking, we'll be here all weekend about the potential of AI and how students should only use it either to figure out how they're learning or to figure out, how they should gather information, and not just, hey, AI, write my essay on Shakespeare.
Yep. I just dropped my email in there. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn if you want to do that. Here's what I would say. I have thinking partners on this topic that have different backgrounds, different capabilities. I think I would encourage everybody to find thinking partners, like people that are like, how are you using it? So I have 4 or 5 people that we're in constant communication about. We send each other stuff. We go look at what each other are working on and what we're learning, because then that expands, because I'm a node in a network of 4 or 5 people, they're nodes and networks. And that really is an important thing. And I think it's cool. It's a fascinating time to be alive. But I guess it's, we live in a world where we have an existence that's primarily wants and desires at this point. We're not needs based anymore. I think somebody kind of brought that up at some point, the pyramid. So hopefully this will just deliver all of our desires and not create a bunch of stress. But I think, I know that the Sphere, for example, has got a whole bunch of wild technology in it that's like that. Very cool. Okay, well, I appreciate it. It's great to meet everybody. Glad it was hopefully it was enjoyable. And if you have any thoughts or things you want to share, you can just send them along.
Happy meeting
Check
you
out
too.